14th edition of the Fantasy Fanatics MMA podcast. I am your host, James Lynch, joined as always by my co-pilot here, JHK. What's up, John? How's it going, buddy?
You know, same old, man. Just excited to get going and talk about this major fight. I love it.
As you guys know, or maybe you don't, if it's the first time watching the show, basically every week, John and I go through an upcoming notable fight. And in today's fight, we're going to be previewing the vacant lightweight title fight between Michael Chandler and Charles Oliveira. We'll get into the details in a second here, but got to remind everyone, make sure you hit that like button, hit the subscribe button here on this channel, and make sure you download the Fantasy Fanatics MMA app. It's awesome. You can go head to head with us when it comes to your picks. I got to remember to put in my picks this week. I forgot last week, but you get what I'm going with here. It's a really cool and interactive app, and we're going to have all that throughout the show. You guys can see the interface and everything else. So really awesome app, and can't say enough good things about it. Let's get into this title fight. So this fight's going to be taking place on May 15th. It's UFC 262. Location is going to be in Houston, Texas. So we're going to have some fans for this one. We'll talk about the optics of that with there being some fans in the crowd here. But this is the vacant lightweight title fight, of course, with Habib Nurmagomedov retiring. We now have a vacant title fight. First, just your thoughts on the matchup itself, JHK, just with the fact that, it seems like this is a merit matchup. Two guys who, on wins, getting the shot.
When I first heard the news that they were going to face each other, I wasn't too surprised, but I expected Dustin Poirier to be one of the guys fighting for the title. But, he's on his own path. He's on his own journey to get the trilogy with McGregor. So it is what it is. You got Chandler, you got Oliveira, you got two guys. Oliveira, no doubt he deserves a title shot. He's done everything he's possibly could to earn a title shot, and he's finally getting one, and he's facing Chandler, the guy that I've always told everybody he's the perfect guy that the UFC wants to hold that title. He could go out there and he could sell the UFC to anybody, right? So I love the matchup. It's an exciting matchup. Two guys that are different in skill set, but powerful and finishers and explosive, and it's just, I don't know, It's insane what we're going to see on that night.
Absolutely. So a couple things, we always talk about the optics. We're going to dig into that first, then we'll get into the stats and each fighter. But I'm not surprised to see Michael Chandler get this title shot. We know he was the backup for the Habib and Gaethje fight. I thought that right there just spoke volumes to how highly the UFC thinks of Michael Chandler in terms of, and kind of what you said there, John. I completely agree with you that he is sort of the perfect mold for what the UFC is looking for. He's a marketable guy. He cuts a good promo. We saw that after the Dan Hooker fight. Like, he is everything the UFC wants in a champion. So you knew he was going to be there. Now, I agree with you. Poirier had a great case to make himself a title shot, but I get where Poirier is coming from. I do. And I know some fans want to shit on the guy, but look, he's got a family. He's got long-term goals that are outside of MMA. We saw his hot sauce and all that stuff. I don't blame the guy for chasing the money. If you have an opportunity to fight Conor McGregor for a third time, you take it, because that's a money ticket, and it's a much bigger fight. Even despite this fact being a title fight, it's a much bigger fight for him than it would be if he fought, say, Chandler or Charles Oliveira. So let's get that out of the way, because there's a lot of idiot fans who want to say, oh, Poirier, he's scared, whatever. No, none of that is true. It's all about money. That's why Poirier didn't take the fight. Now, in terms of Oliveira, I'm so happy to see him get this opportunity. I'm with you, John. Like, we're in the same camp here, that this is a guy that has really worked his way. I mean, how many prospects do we know? Like, I remember when Oliveira came in the UFC, he has had an up and down career, from getting submitted from Jim Miller to trying, 145, which was a disaster, and him missing weight and the whole picture of the Big Mac. And you get where I'm going with this. I mean, I honestly, there was a point where I thought this is going to be another bust in the UFC. And guess what? He's turned it around. And we all like a good comeback story. Maybe not, he's not as old as, say, a Robbie Lawler, but he's certainly, had that same career trajectory where, he's really turned things around. And I really think the last two fights were deserving of getting this title shot. And some people want to say, oh, well, it's Kevin Lee's washed up or Ferguson's washed up. Look, no, I disagree. It's how he beat them. He beat Kevin Lee at his own game. He outstruck Kevin Lee. He could have taken this to the ground and used his superior jiu-jitsu, but he didn't. He's like, you know what? My striking's so good, I can beat this guy at his own game. That's what he did. Then Tony Ferguson, look, that fight went the distance. 90% of that roster in the lightweight division is getting their arm ripped off in that first round. It's just because Tony Ferguson is an insane guy, and he didn't tap, and he was able to survive, and that's the only reason the fight went the distance. I mean, that could have easily been a first-round finish. And when you get two dominant wins over guys like that, that counts for something in terms of the title picture. So in terms of Oliveira getting the shot, it's well-deserved. Chandler's well-deserved. We got to mention some other names here. People saying Gaethje should be back in here. I disagree. Gaethje lost his last fight. I know he's the last interim champ. I know he lost to a guy that's retired now. I'm not a fan of fighters, and I know there's plenty of examples. Don't get me wrong. I know people are going to be like, what about Stipe and all these other champs? I get all that. As far as fighters losing and getting a title shot, I'm not a fan of it. So in this case, Gaethje, if he wants to be the backup, I'm fine with that. If Gaethje wants to fight someone else like a Rafael dos Anjos, I'm fine with that. But this makes absolute sense in terms of this matchup being put together with Poirier to the equation. And yeah, I think that's pretty much it in terms of all the opponents. And also Islam Makhachev, love the guy, great win over Drew Dober. He should be nowhere near a title shot right now. He's got to win over one ranked opponent. We can exclude him from the conversation. So that's the optics of this fight. It's a lightweight title fight. It's vacant. It'll be 5 rounds. Let's start first with Michael Chandler. Let's dig into the former Bellator champion here. 34 years old, 5'8" with a 69-inch reach. Charles Oliveira is 31 years old, 5'10" with a 74-inch reach. So Michael Chandler going to be a little bit shorter and is going to have a reach disadvantage in this fight. Now, Chandler, of course, A-plus performance in his UFC debut, knocking out Dan Hooker. Considering the wars that Dan Hooker has been in, this is a guy that, you know, the fact that he put him away in the first round speaks volumes to how powerful Michael Chandler is in terms of, you know, his stand-up and his striking. So that's outstanding as well. He's on a 3-fight win streak. His last loss was to Patricio Pitbull, who last time I checked is still one of the best in the world. Not a bad loss. I mean, outside of, you know, the weird fight that he had against Brent Primus back in 2017 where he, you know, busted his ankle, he's looked pretty good. There was a stretch in Chandler's career, and I do want to point this out because, you know, we talked about Oliveira turning his career around. Do you remember when Chandler lost 3 fights in a row? Like to Alvarez and Will Brooks, and then the second Will Brooks especially. One of the weirdest fights ever. If you remember what happened in that one, Brooks had hit him, and Chandler was kind of like, I think he like felt like he was concussed or something, but he did a timeout. Do you remember that? That was at Bellator 131 back in 2014. I don't know if you remember that instance, but yeah, it was go back and watch it. It was one of those fights where you're like, is he taking too much damage in his career? It was a very odd finish, and, you know, legit finish. Like Chandler basically quit on it, and I'm not saying that in the quit sense of like, oh, he quit, he's, you know, whatever. I meant he legit felt like he was too hurt to continue. So no shade in that, but for him to continue to progress and basically hasn't lost since then. Because let's be honest here, he's going to beat Brent Primus if his ankle didn't give out. The Pitbull fight, yeah, he lost that. You know, some people say it was the back of the head. I disagree. But, I mean, this is a guy who basically hasn't lost in years. So, yeah, Chandler, you know, with a lot of momentum coming in here. Does he have the merit necessarily to say, oh, you know, I should be, you know, next in line for UFC title shot compared to some of the other lightweights? Maybe not. You know, his only good win right now, if we're looking at it UFC-wise, is Dan Hooker. But that was an A-plus performance. So I don't have an issue with him getting the title shot from that perspective. Your thoughts on Michael Chandler and what he brings to the table in this fight?
When Michael Chandler first got introduced to us as a UFC fighter, I had my doubts, you know what I mean? I had my doubts that, you know, that he would be a top 5 or a top 10 guy. He had the talent to be it. It's just like he hasn't shown us. And I'm a guy that doesn't like to ride the hype trains, right? So that's why I went with Dan Hooker all the way, because Dan Hooker has gone in there with Poirier and some of the best in the world and hung with them and beat them, the Felders and stuff like that. So when they were facing off, I was like, all right, Dan's going to be able to go in there and do what he does. But man, Michael Chandler came out there with all the pressure on his shoulders, pretty much. I think Dan Hooker went in there in a win-win situation in some ways, right? And Chandler was in a dangerous situation, you know, for himself, you know, making his debut against Dan Hooker, and he went out there and starched him in the first round. Incredible. You know, I was kind of shocked how he did it, because you never seen Dan Hooker get knocked out, only by body shots by Barboza before that, right? So it was incredible to see that. And if you look at his last 3 fights, Sidney Outlaw, he's a contender in Bellator. Benson Henderson, also another guy that's a contender in Bellator, knocked them both out, and then he goes on to knock out Dan Hooker. I'm very impressed. I think he's proven himself to us. I think that he goes in there and he shows us a continuation of what he's been doing, right? I think he's in this prime right now, right? What is he, 34 years old? I feel like, you know, some guys hit their prime at like 28, 32, 24. I feel like right now, 34, he's hitting his prime, and he's entering the UFC at the perfect moment.
Before we move on to Oliveira, some other things about Chandler. Obviously, he was a wrestler. He started as a wrestler. If you actually watch his first fight in Bellator, back when I was working at Fight Network, we covered Bellator extensively from their infancy, basically from them being on, what was it, ESPN Deportes to, you know, Plex TV, or not Plex. What was the other channel? They were on a bunch of different platforms, MTV2, all this stuff. So if you watch that first fight he had in Bellator against Marcin Held, he actually got into trouble early on in that fight and was able to come back and weather the storm and get the win in that one. That was back at Bellator 36. I ended up getting the submission submission win over Marcin Held, but he was in a little bit of trouble early on there. But his wrestling is what he started with, and then he started to pick up the stand-up. And that Eddie Alvarez fight, I always tell people this, that is one of my favorite fights of all time, and unfortunately it gets buried when it comes to great fights of all time because it was the same night as Shogun and Henderson, right? So a lot of people forget how good that fight was, but that was the fight that made Michael Chandler a star. That was one of the benefits of doing that tournament format for Bellator back in the day, because no one had really heard or cared about Michael Chandler, but here he is on merit, winning a tournament, and then going in and fighting Eddie Alvarez, who was a legend at the time. I mean, he was over in Japan and making his name over there. He fought a bunch of different promotions, Bodog as well. And then for him to beat Alvarez, that put him over, and that was what made him the face of Bellator at the time. And it continued throughout his career. And I wasn't sure even years later if we'd ever see Michael Chandler in the UFC. So here we are. So Chandler's stand-up has come a long way. Trains at a great camp at Sanford MMA. I mean, we just see, the levels of, that people are leveling up when they go there, and just, the tutelage of Henry Hooft and how great that camp is. So Chandler's in fantastic hands there. But yeah, that's what makes it interesting, because Chandler's got that knockout power. Where does his knockout power rank in the lightweight division? I don't know, but it's up there. It's got to be top 5 for sure. You don't just go out there and knock out a Dan Hooker in the first round for nothing. Plus, in his back pocket, he's got the wrestling, right? It reminds me a bit of Usman in a way, in the sense that, although I think Chandler has more power, where, wrestling base, but you've seen the other tools there as well. And Chandler, like I said, has some submission wins as well. Submitted Derek Campos, submitted Godi Yamauchi as well, Brandon Gertz. So this is a guy that it's good everywhere. And that's the same sort of thing with Charles Oliveira, where we'll get to his skill set in a second here. But Chandler's one of those guys that is good everywhere. So there's going to be no area in this fight where Chandler doesn't have covered. So that's what makes it interesting as well. Any sort of last thoughts on Chandler before we move to Oliveira?
Yeah, I point to that Marcin Held win. He submitted Marcin Held, probably one of the unheralded submission fighters ever in the history of MMA, a great submission fighter. And Chandler went in there and tapped him out. So that shows you that he can go in there and tap out a submission guy. So I think people need to be wary of that.
I completely agree. By the way, we got some questions in the chat. We'll get to those as soon as we're done breaking down this fight, but we sort of wanted to go through all the details first. All right, good time to get to Charles Oliveira du Bronx, 31 years old. It's weird to think that Oliveira is younger than Chandler in a way, because Oliveira's been in the UFC for so long. Oliveira made his UFC debut. Let's go all the way back here. He made his UFC debut on the Versus card, UFC on Versus 2, back in 2010. That's what my math's not very good, but that's a long time. You know what I'm saying? Like it's to be in the UFC for that long. That's what I'm talking about. Like when he came in, everyone was like, oh, next big thing. And then he lost to Jim Miller, and he had, a 3-fight, basically losing streak while it was no contest against Nick Lentz. But you understand what I'm saying? He didn't win a fight in 3, and there was a lot of, sort of up and down fights and some bad career choices. But since moving back up to lightweight, he has really turned things around. I mean, think about it. His last loss was December of 2017 against Paul Felder. Outside of that, he's won all of his fights, and they're good wins too. Jim Miller, nice submission win. Nick Lentz, nice submission win. Jared Gordon, a knockout win. Jared Gordon's found new life at featherweight. And then the Lee and the Lee and Ferguson fights were the ones for me that said, okay, this guy has definitely become a contender in the division right now. So Oliveira's base obviously is jiu-jitsu. That's what he's known for. That's what he came to the UFC on. But his striking, like I said, has come a long way. Go watch the Kevin Lee fight. You see the evolution in him, not only becoming more powerful, but more technical as well. You're really seeing him pick his shots, and it's been fun to watch his rise over the last little bit here. So what makes Oliveira dangerous is that there's really no stone unturned here. If you want to look at this fight from a style perspective, Chandler gets the edge in wrestling. Chandler gets the edge in power. Oliveira, though, good everywhere. I'll say this, great ground game, pretty good, overall skill set. Striking is good, maybe not great. I give Chandler the edge there in terms of power. In technique, I think they're about even, but obviously Chandler has the wrestling as well. So it's interesting to see how this will play out, because Oliveira, outside, like I said, the loss to Paul Felder back in 2017, has looked unstoppable, John. So, Oliveira brings a lot to the table, and he's one of these guys as well that I think is shown to be pretty durable over his last fights as well. There were some finishes early on in his career, but he seems to have fixed the defense and all that. So your thoughts on Charles Oliveira and what he can bring to the table in this matchup?
Man, Oliveira, 8-fight winning streak, and he's only went to the decision once with Tony Ferguson, right? And he's finished every fight in a different way. It just shows you how diverse this guy is, and especially with the submissions. He's got guillotines, he's got rear naked chokes. He's got 2 rear naked chokes. He's got anaconda. Like the dude is insane on the ground, and I'm looking forward to seeing him, go down and test Chandler on the ground. But let's look at some of these stats, man. He's tied for most finishes in UFC history with Cowboy with 16. He has the most submission wins ever with 14 in the UFC. And then performance of the night, he's second with 16 performance bonuses. And submission attempts, he has the most, 35. in the UFC. It just shows you that this guy is a killer. Those numbers just shows you he's a killer, and he's gonna go out there and try to kill Michael Chandler with the ground. You know what I mean? With the stand up. I don't know. I don't really agree with you on the stand up though. You know what I mean? Like he's gotten better, but I don't think that he's gotten to the point where he's the level of Michael Chandler, right? But
I give Chandler the edge. I give Chandler the edge in the stand-up for sure. But I'm just saying that like we saw in the Kevin Lee fight, because he didn't need to do that against Ferguson. He was like, you know what, my jiu-jitsu is better than yours. We're going to play this jiu-jitsu game in this fight. But with Kevin Lee, that's what impressed me. I know Kevin Lee, you know, say what you want about him and where his career is headed, but the fact that he beat Kevin Lee at his own game, I was super impressed by that, and that's pretty fresh in my memory, so to speak. So
yeah. And also Kevin Lee was he was in a weird spot at that time too, man. He wasn't like the Kevin Lee that we saw in previous to that fight. But yeah, I know what you're talking about. And also with Oliveira, man, he's the thing that like shines most about him is he's overcome so much, you know, throughout his career. You know, I mean, he's had some weird fights, some weird ending to fights, and a lot of people doubting him and saying that, you know, he doesn't have a chin or he doesn't have that dog in him, right? He doesn't have that. But man, he showed that he's got that dog in him in his last couple of fights. And yeah, man, I think that's a huge factor entering this fight, is that Oliveira has the dog in him, and he's gonna need to use that dog against Chandler.
One other thing I'll mention, and then I'm going to give you my pick here in a second, is the level of competition. That is one thing. And that's one of the things, that's one of the reasons I picked Dan Hooker over Chandler. And maybe it's going to bite me in the ass here. But, you know, Chandler, you know, we talked about him losing the Pitbull, losing to, you know, Brent Primus. We can erase that one again. It was more of an injury there. But a lot of the, you know, the quality of opposition definitely goes to Oliveira here. Look at this resume, John. I forget who he's fought. I mean, it's like I said, he's been in the MMA since 2010, or in the UFC, I should say. He's fought Jim Miller, Donald Cerrone, Cub Swanson, Frankie Edgar, Jeremy Stevens, Max Holloway, Anthony Pettis, Paul Felder. Has a win over Will Brooks, who Chandler lost to, Kevin Lee, Tony Ferguson. Like, Chandler doesn't have that same resume. Now, that doesn't, you know, in some cases it doesn't matter. I remember when Chris Weidman fought Anderson Silva, people saying the same thing. Who's he beat? How's he going to beat a guy in Silva? You know, maybe it doesn't matter, but that is just another tidbit I wanted to add in here, is that Oliveira has been more battle tested, in my opinion, than Michael Chandler. And, you know, to be honest, we can't take too much away from that Dan Hooker one, in the sense that it was so quick. Like, maybe he just hit Hooker in the right spot and it was good. But if Chandler can't land that knockout punch early on, can he beat an Oliveira if it gets into deep waters, if it goes to those fifth rounds? Now, Chandler has championship experience. I'll give him that. If it goes later, I would probably favor him in that regard, right? But at the same time, Oliveira's been in there with better competition. So that's got to count for something in this fight. My pick in this fight is Charles Oliveira. And I think we might disagree on this one. But for me, what it comes down to is that I don't think Chandler's going to go out there and blitz a guy like Oliveira. Again, very durable. He's taken some good shots in his career. The experience as well. If it gets into deep waters, Oliveira's been there. You know, he's been there with some of the best, right? Some of them are losses. A lot of those names I mentioned were losses, like to Pettis and to Holloway, but that's invaluable experience that Chandler just doesn't have. I mean, if you look at who Chandler's fought, let's talk about the three best fighters that Chandler's fought in his career. Eddie Alvarez, who was in his prime at the time, I'll give him that. Patricio Pitbull, and Hooker. Right, I would say. I mean, you know, Outlaw's there. Where would Outlaw be in the UFC? I don't know. You know, Patricky, Pitbull, Benson Henderson, all those guys, where would they situate in the UFC? Probably outside the top 15. So Oliveira's been fighting those battle-tested guys. My thing is, I think if it goes into deep waters, Oliveira's got the jiu-jitsu to back him up. I think Oliveira can stuff the takedown as well. And I think even with the power, I think Oliveira is going to be so good defensively that I don't think Chandler's going to be able to land one of those fight-ending shots in this fight. I think Oliveira takes his time, picks his shots, and really goes out there and just puts on the best performances of his career. I think this is going to be a coming out party for Charles Oliveira. You know, we sort of saw that in the Ferguson fight, but this time I think he puts an exclamation point on his career in this one, and I think he wins the title here. So I'm going to take Charles Oliveira by decision. I think he gets it done, or perhaps a late finish. Could Chandler win and knock him out? Absolutely. I'm not discounting that. This is a coin flip fight. If we're even looking at the odds right now, Oliveira, I believe, is a let me just bring it up here real quick. Oliveira, actually, I can't spell Oliveira today. I'm going to try and spell Chandler. Do we not have odds for this? Oh, yeah, we do. So Charles Oliveira right now in some books is anywhere from like a minus 130 to minus 150, and Chandler's about plus money at plus 110. I'm going with the odds here, and I'm going with Charles Oliveira. Your pick, John.
Battle tested. You know, you can't get any more battle tested than that Eddie Alvarez fight. You know what I mean? The Eddie Alvarez fights, right? Those are battle-tested moments for Michael Chandler, and I feel like that carries on throughout his career, and he could go in there and fight to the death with anybody. When I look at him, I look at the championship, you know, experience, right? The championship camps. Chandler's been through 11 5 rounds. He's prepared for 11 fights, 5 rounds, right? Oliveira has prepared for 1, which was the Kevin Lee fight, right? So I look at that. I feel like that Chandler carries the advantage, right? He knows what it takes to go through a camp to, be in championship form. Another thing is Oliveira, he's too straight, like he's too, what is it? He's too like straight up when he strikes, right? And that's not going to work too well against Chandler, who likes to leap in with hooks and like big overhands and stuff like that. I think he could get clipped really early in this fight against, Oliveira can get clipped really early in this fight with Chandler. I think Chandler's going to go in there. He's going to press forward. I don't think he's going to worry about going to the ground because he has great defensive wrestling. I think he controls if it goes to the ground, if he goes for takedowns. I don't think Oliveira has good enough takedowns to take Chandler down and keep him down because Chandler's are great at scrambles. Have you seen that video with him and Kamaru practicing wrestling? Like, that's crazy, right? That's Chandler. Chandler can do that all day, I think. I think he has great cardio. He got great power, explosiveness. And that explosiveness, separates him from Oliveira somewhat. And I feel like he's going to be able to connect with him like in the first 2 rounds. I think Michael Chandler is going to become the champ. I think he's going to knock him out in 2.
Good. I'm glad we disagree on this one because we'll definitely revisit this in a couple weeks when the fight actually takes place. But yeah, I mean, look, I could see it. I could totally see it. I just feel like Oliveira, to me, everything he's been through, and you talk about those Alvarez fights, those were back in like 2014. At least with Oliveira, he's fought really tough competition, at least recently. You look at the Holloway fights, even that was actually that might have been in 2014, actually, now that I say that. And it was in 2016. So there you go. He's got a 2-year head start on Chandler there. But you kind of get what I'm saying here. This guy, to me, what it is too, is even the guys that say Oliveira's fought that are maybe, a step below, he's finished them. He's dominated, right? So that's another thing as well that I want to look at. And by the way, we do have the odds here on the ticker. Shout out to our producer, Michael, who does a great job behind the scenes here. Oliveira -140, Chandler +115. So yeah, it's a coin flip. I mean, this might be one of the best lightweight fights of all time on paper. It has to be. I mean, these two guys are really in their prime, It
is, but I was kind of surprised that they made this a main event, to be honest with you. Chandler isn't that household name yet. He could be. Oliveira, he's been doing really well, but that's for like the casuals don't really know Oliveira too well, right? So it's like when you put somebody in a pay-per-view main event, I could see Chandler there, but Oliveira is just, it didn't make sense to me in some ways. I felt like they should have been the co-main.
Sense when you look who the co-main event is. That's why they did that co-main event. It's no different than when Amanda Nunes headlines a card, right? Like Amanda Nunes, as great as she is she the type of star that Ronda Rousey was? Absolutely not. She's not. It's never translated. So that's why she'll get that support cast on a card like that. Like I think they put Whitaker and Romero on one of the cards. Like, you know what I mean? Like they try and give it that boost. So that's why Nate Diaz is on this card. And I'm sure that's also why that fight's 5 rounds as well, is to pay them. And so Diaz would actually take the fight. I mean, we talked about this whole fight last week. So
but they didn't announce that fight until like weeks after they announced Chandler Oliveira, right? So do you feel like they already knew that they were going to put that fight on the card?
They were going to put a fight on that card, I think. Yeah, I don't think they would have just left Chandler and Oliveira as it is, because then obviously, like, I always do the grocery store test. You go to a grocery store right now, yes, 20 people who Michael Chandler and Charles Oliveira, you probably won't get one answer. If I go ask them who Conor McGregor or John Jones is, they'll probably be someone who knows them. So that's my sort of gauge of that. So there you go. John is going with Michael Chandler. I'm going with Charles Oliveira. We'll definitely get our picks in for that one, and then we'll talk a bunch of smack after the fact. Great time to get to questions here. We're about 25 minutes into the chat here.